Hi everyone, this is Valerie from Tusome Books. I am here with Darlyne Bautista. She has authored 3 books. We are going to be talking about From Manila to Manitoba. It's the first volume of a series, and I will show it to you. It's a non-fictional book based on the history of the Filipino Canadian community here in Winnipeg. Thanks for coming to this meeting, Darlyne.
Thank you so much, Valerie. It's great to see you in the digital world here. We could still kind of get together. It's great. Thank you.
So we're going to be talking about your first book, right? So because I've talked to you a few times before, I think we both know what my first question is going to be. So I just want you to kind of tell us about, like in manner of background, and you talked about this in a different video, but tell us about Anak.
Anak is an acronym that means in Filipino and Tagalog, aksyon ng ating kabataan, which means action from our youth. And it's an organization that was formed in 2006 and incorporated, I believe, in 2007. But it's a lifetime of work and experience that we share as second generation and 1.5, or children, immigrant children, and children of immigrants. Mm-hmm. So the word Anak also means my child. So we are children, we are all children of immigrants in representing our organization. And what this means is being the gap generation between those who were born in the Philippines and those who were born fully here, with parents who are born fully here. We have to try and bridge the cultural divides, the intergenerational divides that we've experienced growing up in the 80s and the 90s and 70s. So what that means is articulating these experiences in a manner that is productive and not just productive, but self-affirming. Developing positive self-identity. It is difficult to be raised in a school system that does not quite understand you, does not even understand where you're from. In the 80s, in the 90s, the Philippines was less known, probably the only marker of its popularity, of its infamy was the martial law period with President Ferdinand Marcos and his wife, Imelda Marcos, with all her shoes. So I heard a lot of those type of stories and relationships. But when I have the opportunity to talk to elders in our community that arrived in the 60s, late 50s, and the 70s, it was much harder for them to be lumped in as those who cannot speak English or less intelligent or histories that are not known to them. So understanding these different generational differences are something that as an organization enough we try to bridge, and we've done it. The avenue we've chosen to do it through is education and awareness. So in a very long-winded way, again, that is Anak.
That's helpful. Thank you. I think what you guys are doing is amazing. I don't know how many other communities, immigrant communities here have a publishing branch. So I think that's really amazing. And you don't just have, one book, you have multiple. And yeah, it's important to record, the history of your people from when they first arrived in Winnipeg. So I definitely admire that.
I wish all communities will have the same opportunity. It's so important.
Yeah. I want to believe that, as time goes, and because everyone's starting to really think about their part in Canadian society. So hopefully that's the direction that people are going in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another important thing about Anak Publishing, it's an offshoot of Anak. We have publications that work with the public school, children's, elementary, but we have to be also represented in academia. Academia being the university, the post-secondary system, and unfortunately, I find the knowledges that are being imposed on us as Filipinx, and Filipino people is coming from research from those who exist outside of our community.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be implicated in a way that you feel personally is not representative of your community and yourself. I think it is very important that all communities have an opportunity to speak through their own voices.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
No.
I got a little serious there.
I was laughing because I was like, okay, how do I now transition? No, but I think that's actually a very important point that we've talked about. And yeah, let's just keep hoping that, everybody else sees this as important and moves in that direction, right? So tell me about From Manila to Manitoba. This is very different from your other work, because your other two books are children's books. They're playful and they're fun, and this one, I'm not saying this is not fun. This was actually, I enjoyed it. It was very engaging and very educational. But it's nonfiction and it's history. So I kind of just want to know about the story in itself. Like,
Sure.
What are you doing with this book? And what I guess what part in the community it's supposed to help or to enlighten.
Okay, sure.
It's very...
So there's so many different layers to why I wanted to write From Manila to Manitoba. My academic background is in history and international development. And then my graduate studies is in Southeast Asian studies. So during that journey to finish my master's, it's been, and this is a time when there's no internet, it's still dial-up. So if you want to learn about who you are, I really have to contextualize that for our young people, our young adults, that studying in Canada about your history and yourself without the internet was a challenge. You have to really rely on returning home, which is very costly and it's very rare to happen, or books that arrive and you cannot rely always that these books will be pertinent to what you're researching or studying. And so it was very important to me, even through high school, to be able to create or to work with others to create a body of research that is representative of us. So Manila to Manitoba kind of came out of that frustration and desire to be represented in academia. And so this kind of evolves from our work with the University of Winnipeg in creating a Philippine Studies courses and working with other organizations in the United States, in University of Wisconsin Madison, Southeast Asian Studies program. And then now how I ended up here at University of Toronto, working with other like-minded scholars. And there are so few of us that are invested in this field because, again, it's not recognized. It's Southeast Asia you ask people where Southeast Asia is and they know East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, but Vietnam, Thailand, Burma, Singapore, no, it's less known. Philippines even among that group. Well, maybe Thailand because there's a lot of tourism, but still there's no real understanding of the depth of our histories. So from Manila to Manitoba, okay, I have to put a caveat. Manila is the capital of the city, of the country. But I want to be clear that Manila is not the center of the country. There is a lot of regionalisms. There's hundreds of languages, hundreds of dialects. And the only reason why the Philippines is a country is because of our colonial past, right? So it's like saying Toronto is the center of Canada, Manila is the center of the Philippines. So I want to I chose Manila to Manitoba because they both start with M. That's it.
Oh, okay. So you're not saying center as in this is a country and right the middle? Like when you say Manila is not, like it's not the focus?
Manila is the capital, but there are Cebuano people from the Visaya region who speak a completely different language from those in the Luzon area, which is the bigger island on the top where Manila is based. So there's a lot of regionalisms about who is represented and who is underrepresented in policy, in decision making, in the histories. And I should have had more of a caveat that this is not a Manila-centric story. This is a story that is diverse. But because Manila sounds good next to Manitoba, that's how that evolved. And the stories that come out of the Manila to Manitoba series comes from an oral history project that we did as an organization. We worked with students and members of the community, and I curated with others this exhibit that highlighted the experiences from 1950s, late 1950s onwards to 2010. So the exhibit only lasts for a few months to be more of something that we can return to again and again. So the volume 1 of the series expresses what was happening post-war in Canada and in the Philippines. And so Dr. Belmonte, we've had the honor of interviewing to discuss how he arrived in Canada, because there were so few, less than a dozen that arrived. So his story his narrative is very, very valuable. I think I answered the question.
Yeah. You've actually moved into the next one, so that's good.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah. So the question is, I guess I'd like you to talk about Dr. Jose Belmont. Is it Belmont or Belmonte?
Belmonte.
Belmonte. Yes. Okay. Yes. So I'd like you to talk about, how the story is told, with a focus on him and his arrival to Winnipeg, and and his professional and community, his relevance to the medical profession and to the community, the Winnipeg community, and specifically to the Filipino community here. Okay. That's it. And his contribution to Winnipeg. Yeah, I mentioned that.
For sure. Okay, so the premise of the Manila to Manitoba exhibit at the Manitoba Museum, just to preface before I get into Dr. Belmonte, was to highlight individuals beyond those that are represented in politics and in the mainstream sphere. So we have a lot of notable Filipinos who have been in office, and there's also some notable Filipinx elders who have been in the mainstream media. Mm-hmm. And the point of the exhibit was to show the other voices in the different sectors and groups. So each decade in that exhibit represents not only a wave, the trends of immigration that time, but also the political, economic, social conditions in the Philippines. So to highlight a politician every month did not give the full picture of what was being presented in that exhibit. So oral history as a theory, the practice we decided to present our history through, again, oral history because of the lack of access to materials, and oral history being a knowledge, community knowledge, intergenerational knowledge that has yet to be recorded. It focuses on the everyday life and experience of those Filipino Canadians during those times. And so it's not just a discussion of what happened during that time, but it is a discussion of the relationship of remembering that experience. So it's as an elder person speaking to their arrival in their 20s and 30s, mm-hmm. It's not a question of whether it was fact or, well, of course, the fact is corroborated with research, but it's also that person's recollection and remembrance of that decision to come to Canada. So there's so many layers to this discussion. So when we met with Dr. Belmonte, his daughter was actually the one to introduce us to him. And so as a leader in the community, he would say he's not. He's a very, very humble man. And he spoke a lot of other people that arrived before him. And he spoke a lot of other people in the community. So it was very interesting for me to sit down and speak with him and his family, because the way he spoke of his relationship to that memory and his relationship to that past was very foundational and communal. So to say Dr. Belmonte did this, and this to Winnipeg, I think he wouldn't like me to say that. But so you'll see the way the book unfolds, Dr. Belmonte's experience in the Philippines. So he comes from affluence. He's able to go to school during the war. This is the 1940s, and it's very rare for majority of Filipinos to even have pictures. That time, my grandparents I don't have any pictures of my grandparents. So for me, I come from a very rural background. So a fishing, farming community, so a very humble background. So to sit with Dr. Belmonte and to see a different aspect of the Philippines I had never known was very eye-opening for myself. So we see how he is able to already enter a different strata in the Philippines through his studies. But you also see how it stops. And why does it stop? And why does that sense of opportunity end? And for there, we talk about different political systems in the Philippines. And so it's kind of heavy stuff. And you see this unraveling with American occupation, Japanese occupation, a school system brought forward by Spanish colonialism. So you'll even see a picture of his degree is written in Latin, right? Beautifully done. So he finds he needs to leave because he cannot practice. And so he comes to Canada, where he is welcomed to a degree. And then as I was researching, he started mentioning other doctors who were arriving from the United States into Canada. And so there's another layer of history, because the Americans had colonized the Philippines for so long. There were a number of professionals arriving in the United States. So here's our connection to that diaspora now, right? And so we have this other layer, and he marries a Canadian woman. And then his children are telling the story of being the first Filipino-Canadian mixed race of 1960s. And so there's just so many layers. And then we talk about Medicare. What is his role in the creation of a Medicare system? Something that they're still grappling with in the United States. So it was so fascinating to see from this really, really humble man to talk about these stories that were probably not asked of him in such detail. And so the purpose of this is to not so much say that we have a stake in Canada, but to affirm that our history is important. It doesn't matter if it's Canadian or Filipino. These layers to his understanding of his past and our understanding of our past through his story is a collective one that we should be discussing. So that, I believe, in a very long-winded, wordy nutshell, is the relevance of Dr. Belmonte, a very humble, I can't even say the word, anesthesiologist.
What's with anesthesia, right?
Anesthesiologist. Yes.
So, two comments for you. One is that I was very surprised that when he moved to, because he went and did internship in Sudbury, Ontario, and he apparently did not need to get any other additional education like we have to now. I thought that was really interesting. Do you know if that was just because he was from the Philippines, or was it that way across the board in the past?
Well, that's a very good question.
It just made me wonder what changed.
Oh, that's a very good question. Um, I know with working with other scholars, Valerie Damasco does a study in 1960s of nurses. And there is actually a policy that specifically outlines the recruitment of Filipino medical workers, nurses, and doctors. So, because of the American style education, it appears that it is parallel to Canadian education. I think what has changed is the corporatization of immigration and education. So for myself that has a degree in the United States, it's not easily accepted as well in Canada. So
Oh,
it's been a long time for me to return to graduate school. So the the politics behind credentialization, I think it also goes alongside the discussion of racial capital, which degrees are valued more from which countries, which bodies are valued more, and which knowledges. And so we see that discussion of Eurocentricity, Western knowledges, Western education being more valued. And I think what has changed perhaps is the supply of labor. There is an abundance of Filipino nurses and caregivers who are lining up and willing to come to Canada despite those hindrances and restrictions. Whereas the 60s and 50s, with the shortage of doctors and nurses, there is no limit to who can come,
yeah.
so long as they perform to a certain standard. And you'll see that Dr. Belmonte discusses that he was able to practice, but it was at an intern level.
Yeah.
He did not achieve residency because of the racism that he did experience. So, and he did not seem bitter about it. He said it in such a factual way. His wife was very bitter about it, angry about it, the Canadian wife. So I'm sure at the time it was probably something very disheartening for him, but in his reflecting on his past, he was very, very matter of
I
fact.
guess.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate, and there's so many layers. It's part of the research I'm doing now about
Oh, yeah.
this. Yeah. So the next volumes will discuss garment industry and industrial work. And
I'm really
in
looking
light,
forward to that.
yes. It's just a lot of rewriting, and I just want to get it right. I want to honor everyone the way they should be honored.
Yeah. So the other thing I was going to comment on is you talk about how, like the thing with oral history. Well, like first of all, there's very little, actual literature about the history, right? So you have to rely on oral history because the older people are carrying that knowledge, that information. But then you mentioned that the problem with oral history is that you only get to know what the teller is willing to tell, right? So then
Yes.
how do you create that balance, from what you're being told, and making sure that you're not missing some information because that person chose not to discuss it?
Right. That is a very, very good question. And it's an ethical question. You don't want to, go around, let's ask their children, let's ask their friends. And then it just turns into gossip. So you note where the pause is. You note where the hesitancy is. Right. And then I'm learning a lot more about decolonizing research and understanding how communication is also communicated culturally. So a pause can mean a hesitancy, or a pause could mean, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Brown to brown. We don't need to say this out loud. So, so I will note that, and I respect. Some information is not meant for everyone, because I am aware that this information can be manipulated. I am aware that there are people that will exist who will not believe that our histories are relevant. So they'll pick and choose what parts of these discussions are relevant for their own research. And so if there is a hesitation or a pause, I will respectfully ask if they want to stop. I will note that if there's a pause happening, and I will have to sit down with my research and respectfully understand, decolonize, try to understand what that message was in that pause. So it's not for me to interrogate. If there's an issue of racism, for example, and the person doesn't seem upset yet does not choose to speak more about that experience, I will note that there was a incident, period. If I want to delve more into it, perhaps I would look at the statistics or the policies that existed in that time that are public knowledge, and say, so and so many people were affected by this head tax or Chinese head tax, or so many people, according to the newspapers at that time, experienced loss of work. So it would be a more, I guess, neutralizing way of, but to always be respectful and to always be mindful of the knowledges that we are being given and blessed with to keep.
Right.
So that's a very ethical, difficult thing to do.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
The book was very enlightening, especially for someone, for me, who, is outside of your community. It was a lot of new information, and it was also like very fascinating to read about people who've been here for generations, and yet we don't know enough. So it was, and the other thing is, it was a very comfortable read. It wasn't too complex. Sometimes you pick up books and you want to.
Oh, I'm glad. That was the goal.
It was like going through. I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. It was just a book that I didn't want to put it down when I started reading it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And then the quotations, because you quoted the person you're interviewing, Belmont, Dr. Belmonte. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
So you quoted him, as he spoke from time to time, and then there's also lots of pictures. Yeah, it was very well done. So I just wanted to say that, and then to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to add to this discussion. I know we've gone on for a while. Like, this is...
Yeah, I'm just happy someone read it, Like, you sell to the family and the community. And it was really disheartening when the book first came out, because you don't see it really, the big bookstores take it on. You see it on the bookshelf and it not being appreciated. And when you've poured your heart and soul into something, it can be very depressing to feel again othered by the industry. And so that would be another reason for the pause between volumes, because it's, do I want this knowledge to be out there when it is so, well, maybe not sacred, but it's so important and so valuable and so close to me and so close to these living people and living narratives. And for some of the people that we've interviewed who have passed, this is their last documented recordings of their loved ones. So it's very hard to put out there with a price tag and then being told that it may sell or not sell. And I have to say to your bookstore, to Tusome Books, that this is an opportunity that has, I didn't think would come, to be honest. I would have the occasional scholar read the book and manipulate it, or a Filipinx scholar read it and go, thank you. And I'll be like, okay, so you're the one that read it. Thank you. But it's so much work to put in, and just to normalize these stories, not making them so unique and so like siloed, right? Yeah. This is a Filipino history. Like, can we just call it history?
Yes.
Right? That That instead, this is a Southeast Asian expert. No, this is knowledge as we all need to respect, and we have to stop putting value over other knowledges and histories. A lot of what my knowledge has come from Indigenous knowledges. I'm learning from Black feminism. I'm learning from now African knowledges, storytelling and oral history keeping. There's so many different ways and versions of learning it that we have to break away from this extractive experience of taking knowledge from our elders and our people. So I'm learning so much from others. And I think this is where the premise of this book comes from. I'm sharing my knowledge through the knowledge that I've learned from others. So I don't want to limit it to a Filipino experience, but an experience.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, does that make sense?
It does, yes. I completely agree with you, right? Like, as much as the story is about, the migration from the Philippines into Canada, into Winnipeg specifically, it's not the history of Filipinos only, it's Canadian history, right? And we're all Canadian, we all occupy this land. And so I think it's very important that we embrace it and not, we need to stop othering others.
Yes, yes.
Each other. I think that's a better way to put it.
Yes. And then these solidarities and our interlocking oppressions, our colonial and imperialist pasts, all of the things we need to move forward from is relevant to understanding how these histories are pertinent to our own self-discovery and community building, which I hope we can all do amidst this craziness that is happening now. So, yes. Long-winded, I'm sorry. I got all professor on you.
I've actually really enjoyed this discussion. I am very excited for this book, so everyone needs to pick this one up for sure. Awesome. So thanks, Darlyne, for meeting with me.
Thank you so much, Valerie. You're the best.
Thank you.
Okay.